Is this the best Seiko Prospex 6R diver yet? Well, I don't know, but let's try to find out. I'm Zach Weiss, co-founder of Worn & Wound, and today I'm going to be comparing the newest generation of the 62 Mas inspired Seiko divers with the last generation, specifically the SPB453, since it's a watch I've owned and enjoyed for many years. When the SPB453, 145, 147, and 149s came out in 2020, it was nothing short of a revelation. The 62 Mas inspired watches seemed to finally achieve something that Seiko had gotten close to many times, but never quite nailed. They took an old, iconic watch from their archives, in this case the first Seiko diver, and properly modernized it. It looked right, it fit right, and it featured a higher level of fit and finish. It was a turning point for the brand, as they proceeded to release several other 6R Prospex divers in the same price bracket over the following couple of years, all around in just north of 1K, and with the same level of respect for the roots, but an appreciation of the current enthusiast. Specifically, I'm thinking about the Captain Willard and 6159 inspired models. In regards to the 62 Mas models, since 2020, we've seen a plethora of different colors and limited editions come out, with the only real change of note being the addition of a small lume block by the date at 3, where originally there was none, such as on this. But earlier this year, Seiko gave the watch a proper overhaul, birthing what could clearly be called a new generation of the 6R 62 Mas. With that said, in a move that clearly acknowledges the success of the previous generation, the new model isn't a return to the drawing board. Rather, it's evolutionary. Everything is a touch different, zhuzhed just a bit, perhaps upgraded and refined, but not without some new contentious details either. I'll start with perhaps the simplest thing of all, how they look in general terms. To a watch enthusiast, there are some clear differences, ignoring that the SPB149, the old model, and the SPB453, the new one, are different colors. But I'd imagine to the layperson, they look basically identical. The dial layout, case shape and size, bracelet, etc. all look just about the same at a glance. Stare a bit, and some subtle differences will emerge. The layout of the bezel has been updated ever so slightly to allow for a complete set of minute marks in addition to numerals at every 10 minutes. On the previous version, Seiko dropped dots on either side of the numerals, allowing for a larger type. It's one of those things that once you notice is actually a bit annoying, though in my experience has had no effect on my usage or enjoyment of the watch. The numerals on the new model are shorter, allowing for dots as well as an additional square marker, fully fleshing out the track. It's a dive watch at heart, so a functional improvement like this is definitely a plus. Aesthetically, it's a marginal change, but it does make the bezel a touch busier. Another slight difference, the white infill is much brighter on the new model, but neither are fully loomed. The dial has a couple more changes that are a bit easier to notice, but don't really change the overall look. First is the addition of 3 days next to automatic in the text at 6. This irks me as I just really don't need to see 3 days on my dial every day. I also don't need to see automatic or really anything else, save the logo, which is also debatable. Before seeing the watch in person, this bothered me more than it does in real life. The text is tiny and easy to ignore. 200 meters has also become 300 meters, but I'll get to that later. The other and far more contentious change is that of the date window. The traditional rectangle at 3 has been swapped for a small circle at 4.5, with the angle of the numeral corrected. Seiko didn't do themselves any favors with the fanboys with this decision, but, and I say this knowing I might get flamed for it, I don't hate it, as this is a modern interpretation and not a recreation. The obvious benefit is that the marker at 3 is full size now, which increases legibility and adds appealing symmetry to the dial as far as the markers are concerned. The less obvious benefit is that the date is completely ignorable now, especially since it's white on black. So when you don't want to read it, it disappears from sight like something in your peripheral vision. I'd imagine in theory this is a good feature on a dive watch in use. You want to keep attention where it's needed. The downside is that it's also a lot smaller, so depending on your vision, it might not be as legible in general. And let's just be honest, it's a bit off-putting. It's a very modern detail in a setting that still relies heavily on the past, and the location is a touch jarring. The original 62 Mas had a date at 3, and I don't believe there was ever a non-date version, which this new model now almost looks like. This either works for you or it doesn't. I don't mind it, I actually like it because it disappears, and after years of getting dive watches that feel more and more vintage, seeing them begin to turn more modern again is exciting. That said, it's the single most notable difference between the new and older generation, and a betrayal of the original 62 Mas design. I will say, if Seiko had just kept the old date with the small marker next to 3, they could have avoided the issue altogether. With that out of the way, the other differences, of which there are many, are so slight they require calipers to notice. The diameter has dropped from 40.5 to 40 millimeters, which is a bit hard to measure because of the case shape and the crown, but I'll take their word for it. Easier though is that the bezel external diameter went from 40.1 to 39.45, still subtle. The dial opening then dropped from about 29.8 to 28.6. These are all ballpark numbers, but measured multiple times, just for the record. Further, the lug-to-lug has dropped a millimeter as well. The effect is that of greater compactness. It's not radically smaller in any way, and I wouldn't be surprised if optically one couldn't tell the differences at all, but I do think it goes towards the feel of the watch, which is most affected by a reproportioning of the case profile. On paper, the height of the watch changed from 13.2 to 13 millimeters, though to my calipers, they've gone from 13.9 to 13.2. But the overall numerical change almost doesn't matter, because the flat portion of the mid case has gone from 3 to 2.5 millimeters. This is actually noticeable and goes a long way towards making the new watches read thinner on and off the wrist. Is this a revolutionary difference? No, but it's just perceivable enough to be a refinement. Look, I never thought the 149 was too thick, though some people did, but the new watch just feels a touch better and rides a bit lower. The last thing to know about the case I actually mentioned earlier, but for the dial print would be invisible. The water resistance has increased from 200 meters to 300 meters. While diving to 300 meters, let alone 200 meters, is likely not something you are going to deal with, it just leads to the new watch as being perceived as tougher, more over-engineered, and thus a better value, which in a sports or a tool watch, especially a Seiko, is always a positive. Like I said at the top of this video, everything has been redone, including the bracelet and the clasp. Aesthetically, the bracelet, which once again I liked on the old model, remains about the same, but they've rethought the entire thing, starting with the end links. Male end links are tricky and generally less preferable as they extend the length of a watch. On the old watch, from end link to end link was not an insignificant 52.7 millimeters. However, thanks to the curvature, they sort of wrapped around the wrist, allowing the watch to not feel too long, at least on my 7-inch wrist. I can't speak for smaller wrists, however. The new model still has male end links, but they are now about 49.4 millimeters end to end, which is a significant change where it counts. Still fits my 7-inch wrist great and should allow for a better fit for smaller wrists as well. The new end link also looks a touch better constructed, with a taller central portion that appears slightly more nicely machined. Following the resized end links, every link has been shortened as well, from 13.3 millimeters to about 10.5, another sizable change. It's funny, I never thought the links in the 149 looked long, but once you see it with the new bracelet, they do look a touch out of proportion. But the change is more than aesthetic, as smaller links equate to a more flowing bracelet, as well as one that can be sized potentially with more accuracy. Finally, the clasp also got resized, previously measuring 37.7 millimeters long before the dive extension, and now 27.7, which is very noticeable. I imagine this allows for additional links to be used, once again a benefit to sizing and overall flow. In fact, sized to my 7-inch wrist, the previous bracelet had 10 links in total, the new bracelet has 13. Interestingly, the clasp is actually the same design functionally as the previous. They just shortened it overall. Visually, this was a good move, and hopefully with the smaller links, the loss in micro adjust points won't matter. But it's 2024. If you're gonna make a new bracelet, especially on a diver, it needs on-the-fly micro adjust. Get with the program, Seiko. The final change worth some discussion is within. The 6R35 had a 70-hour power reserve, and the 6R55 has 72 hours, which, as the dial will never let us forget, is 3 days. Cool. Otherwise, they both have 24 joules, hacking, hand-winding date, and a frequency of 21,600 beats per hour. And sadly, a rated accuracy of plus 25 to minus 15 seconds per day. I'm guessing the 3 days helps them at retail, as Swatch Group brands have had 80-hour reserves for some time, but I can't think of a mechanical watch enthusiast who wouldn't choose a tighter daily swing over 2 hours of additional reserve. If any of my watches were plus 25 seconds a day, I'd assume they need to be serviced. That being said, every 6R I've owned has performed well enough. And with that, I've basically gone through all of the major differences between the new and old generation of the 6R 62 Mas diver. To put a pin in it, I think the new generation is better in most ways, if only a little bit. I don't feel compelled to trade in my 149 to get one, but if I'd been on the fence before, I think the new improvements would push me over the line. It's just a bit refined in most ways, but still not revolutionized. That is, of course, if you don't mind the date window, which I don't, but hey, I get it. Let us know what you think of the new Seiko 62 Mas divers in the comments, and thanks for watching.